school classroom, what comes to mind? Those signature desk chairs? Arts and crafts? Maybe even those broken crayons. As we head into the new school year, you can now add in the following: active shooter drills, banned books, uncertainty on whether to discuss topics like race and gender. It's just some of the things that teachers will have to navigate through this year, and today we're hearing from them directly on how they plan to do just that.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Tammy Fields. We're here for Justice for All inside the classroom. I want to introduce you to our special guests that are here with us today. We want to start with Stephanie Meyer. Thank you for being here with us. Stephanie is a social studies teacher and a college professor. Sitting right next to her, Tanika Bango Cooper. She is a community partnership school director. And Bobby Aganina, an English teacher. Thank you all for being here with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
So we want to jump right in. I know this is a topic that we've talked about a lot. This is Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act. A lot of people will know it. I know critics will also call it the Stop Woke Act. It's called that for short. It really regulates how schools and employers can talk about race and gender. And we know that talking about critical race theory is off limits in kindergarten through 12th grade, though through our research, we have learned no schools have been teaching critical race theory. So let's talk about that. And I'll start with you, Stephanie. What are your thoughts on this, on the Stop Woke Act?
So I think that this is an important bill that was passed, and it's an important law. I have seen and talked to many teachers in our district who have been very concerned about some of the professional development training and some of the materials in some of that professional development. And so I think that, you know, the general consensus among the teachers that I've spoken to is that they're happy that some of those materials will no longer be allowed to be used in some of the professional development training.
Can you speak to anything very specific that really bothered them in that training?
I think some of the books that they were being asked to read and some of the I don't want to say specifically what books, but there were books and there's been materials that have been, you know, given to teachers as handouts and things like that. And I think they were really concerned about some of it. Just, you know, it building a divide, I guess, between, you know, other teachers and professionals. And so I definitely see why teachers and many people are supporting the bill.
And Tanika, your thoughts on Stop the Wrongs?
So I think that when we talk about like a Stop Woke and just the acronym and using woke, I think it's a play on words and society and just maybe dividing or being a little bit more divisive. I think anytime that you want to be able to create an environment of exclusivity, that you want to be able to include all people in their feelings and consider that. So I don't necessarily think that it's something that is necessary. I think it is a scare tactic and a play on words and how we're able to give diversity training so that people are understanding in the classroom and outside of the classroom, and how we deal with different scenarios and inside the classroom.
Bobby, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I teach English, right? So we deal with a lot of literature. I have never in my 13 years taught critical race theory. I don't know a single other educator in any school that I've worked at that has taught critical race theory. I have never been given materials that would be considered with this ban, the Stop Woke. So I strongly disagree with the legislation. What I think they could have done is instead empower educators and give us even better materials, right? And actually fund our public schools and our schools. And instead of legislating something that's not happening, and it's unnecessary, it's completely unnecessary.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts about teachers who might feel a different way getting these kinds of materials? I know that the spirit in which those materials are given are based on inclusivity and diversity and equity, but you say some teachers may feel uncomfortable with some of what's in it.
Right, and I think it's important too. Critical race theory is not a class that we teach. It's not. Critical race theory is a philosophy, and so I definitely agree that it's not being taught per se in our classrooms as a class or as okay, today, guys, we're going to learn critical race theory, but critical race theory is a philosophy, and it's a lens in which you look at the past or you look at today and whatnot. And so there has been some instances and some materials, and I've seen them in our district. Many of the teachers have gone to the district and complained. Many parents have complained. And I guess maybe it depends on what district you're in, and maybe your perception or your belief system or your understanding of critical race theory and its origins. But it most definitely has been an issue in our district in the past. And, I'll say that, everybody has the right to be represented, and we absolutely need to be inclusive to everyone. And I think that should always be a part of our professional development. But when you look at the professional development that I've seen and that many of the teachers have spoke up about in our county, in our district, almost all of the professional development was centered around race. And I think that was disturbing, because our teachers do need good professional development. Our teachers do need, we do need more training in different areas. One of the things that I think we need to talk about in our school districts is discipline, for example, and how do we better serve our students in applying fair consequences for, disruptive behavior and things like that. So I agree that, there are other things as a district and at the state level that we could be focusing on. But I definitely do see that there has been instances of materials and books and professional development trainings that have made people uncomfortable. And I think anytime we kind of say, well, you're this or you're that, and we kind of put people in a box, it feels marginalizing. And I think we should, we need to be more unified.
Yeah, and so even in that, I think that, it's really difficult to be able to not face, to not face uncomfortable conversations. So I think that when we talk about and use the word uncomfortable, we have to be careful in even using that, because it is difficult to have uncomfortable conversations, but you can't fix what you don't face. So when we talk about, trying to move our country and our community forward, we have to have hard conversations. And sometimes that means making people uncomfortable. But it doesn't mean that it's not necessary. So I think necessary conversations are, we have to have uncomfortable conversations, and we don't get to, erase the past and, at the expense of making one person feel demarginalized and not addressing issues. There are plenty of conversations that take place, in the classroom that make people uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean that it's unnecessary. So I think, when we talk about, moving a country forward and being inclusive and including everyone in what that forward mobility looks like, there are uncomfortable conversations that need to happen. But when you label it as critical race theory and, different philosophies and how we teach that, I think that's where the play on words come in, and those are scare tactics to be able to really have hard conversations to be able to move, our society forward.
Well, speaking of tough conversations that we're having when it comes to the classroom and these new laws, there's one thing we also want to talk about, and that is besides race, and that is what happens when we talk about sexual identity and gender orientation in our classrooms. That too is a very hot topic. We're going to jump into that when we come back right here on Justice for All Inside the Classroom. Welcome back, everyone. Justice for All Inside the Classroom. We are talking about hot topics that our teachers are going to be facing in the classroom, how it will impact not only them, but their students as well. We have some guests who are here with us, and we're going to jump right back into the conversation, this time speaking about parental rights in education. It stops classroom instruction when it comes to sexual identity or gender orientation. Critics have called it the Don't Say Gay bill. I'm going to start this time with Bobby because we didn't hear from you at the very end of the last segment. So what are your thoughts on how this will impact teachers in the classroom? There was some thought that teachers were teaching about gender orientation and sexual identity. You say what?
Right, which again doesn't happen in the classroom, right? Those conversations are driven by our students, right? Me personally, I'm a gay teacher, openly gay teacher. And I want my students to know that it's okay to be gay and it's okay to say gay. And if they're transgender, they're lesbian, or even questioning, I think it's really important those conversations to have. Are we as teachers creating those conversations? No, but I think it's important that we create a safe environment and safe space for them to have those conversations.
Tanika, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I don't know of curriculum that addresses that in the classroom as well. I think that these are student-led conversations. And so the concern is that, number one, teachers don't know what the law means and what it means. Like, hey, at one point we're having teachers where do I have to take pictures down of me and my significant other? What does that mean? So that they are making sure that they're following the parameters of it. But secondly, the concern is, the impact on students. And so what do those conversations look like, and how do you create a safe place for students to be able to have those conversations? As a parent, you want to know all of the things that are happening with your child. But additionally, if your child isn't safe being able to say something, you want a safe adult to be able to have those conversations. So the concern is that I work in a high school, and so when those conversations or students bring up those conversations, what does that look like? And how do you safely, guide a student to the appropriate person to have that conversation with, but also not put them in danger at home? And what does that look like? When they go home, if they are unsafe or uncomfortable with having those conversations with their parents and they're not ready to have it yet, what does that look like? And so I think the concern is what it means, the impact on the student, not necessarily the parent.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts?
So I think really the most important portion of this bill is the first part that nobody really is focusing on right now, and that is the portion of the bill that affects any student K through 12 and their family and their parents. And what that part of the bill says is that school districts cannot withhold any information from the family that might impact the emotional, the social, or the physical well-being of that child. And I think, I'm a mom, and I know there is nobody who loves my children more than me. And I think it's inappropriate for any adult outside of an adult in the home, a parent, to be having these types of conversations with a minor child. And I think it's very inappropriate as well that information as important as something as sexual identity be withheld from a parent. We've seen several instances here in the state of Florida where one in particular, this information was withheld from a child or from a parent, from a family, and this child attempted suicide at school twice before the family was notified of these conversations that had been happening between the guidance counselor and the student. And so again, this is very important that these conversations be had with parents. I just do not believe the narrative that overwhelmingly parents are not going to support their children. I think that's just not true. And I know as a mom that nobody loves my children more than I do. And I think parents have every right to be involved in these conversations, and they need to know anytime that the physical well-being, the mental well-being, or the emotional well-being of their child is, could be impacted.
So, Stephanie, let me just ask you this question, just to keep it 100 here. As a teacher, I am sure that you have called parents and emailed parents and sent them text messages to come see about their child when it comes to their academics. And not every parent is involved and runs up to the school when they hear from a teacher. So what do you do with a child that does not have that type of parental involvement and they need help and they're reaching out for someone, grasping for someone to be able to talk to about their feelings because they're looking for some help?
Right, and that's why I think it's important that we have mental health counselors available for our students, but in no way do I think that teachers should be having these conversations with students. If there is a concern in the home, I think we all would, if there's a concern in the home, a known concern, make sure that the authorities are aware, make sure that the appropriate, social worker knows and the guidance counselor knows. But again, it's not the teacher's role to talk to students about these types of things. I think, especially without their parents knowing. I know I would not want any adult who is not me or my husband talking to my child about something this important and this impactful on their life.
So Bobby, I want you to jump in here. And what are your feelings when you hear what Stephanie says? And not only for a student that might be grappling with this, but what about other students who don't have any skin in the game, but as teachers, your job is to teach them to be welcoming and understanding of people who might be different than themselves.
Right, so I'm just thinking about a student coming to me or any teacher and saying, Mr. A, I'm gay. I'm going to then go out them to their parents? Well, I'm not going to do that. That is an extremely emotional and difficult choice to even say that phrase to any person. And the first person you have to have that conversation with is yourself. So that they have that conversation with themselves and then they feel trust and supported to go to me or go to another teacher and say this. We're then going to turn around and tell their parents, guess what, your son's gay. Your daughter's a lesbian. Yes. We could be endangering that child.
Right, but I also think in the instance that I'm referring to that happened in Jacksonville, where a student actually attempted suicide twice, and that family is now suing the school district for withholding that information. I also think that on the other side of this, it could be dangerous for the child, and that there's a perfect example of that. And so, like I said, if there is abuse in the home, a student comes to you and says, I'm being abused, this is why, and I have this on this is, part of that, right? We have to do what we've always been taught to do, which is to alert authorities, right? So we can make sure that that child is safe. But we have to look at the impact on both sides. And that's why, we can look to the incident that I'm referring to. And there's been other incidents throughout Florida, and I think that's why this bill was needed, because we need to make sure that parents are involved in their child's life. Now, I think particularly when we're talking about much younger kids, like, for example, middle schoolers, is this where this incident I'm talking about, this child, I believe, was in 6th or 7th grade, the child that attempted suicide. Parents need to be part of those conversations. And in no way am I saying that, children shouldn't, accept each other for who they are and be loving. But at the same time, we need to make sure that parents are involved. There is nobody in most instances that loves their children more than their family. And I think at the end of the day, parents need to be involved in these conversations.
I know you want to say more. I promise we'll pick it up right after the break. We're talking about this sensitive topic. This is also a topic that has been written by many, many authors, and many have written for teenagers in particular to share their stories in hopes it helps them. So we want to get to that next too. We're going to be talking about book censorship, though, in our state of Florida next, right here on Justice for All Inside the Classroom. Keep it here. Welcome back, everyone. Justice for All Inside the Classroom. We have 3 teachers here talking about some sensitive subjects. These subjects are going to be key when our students head back into the classroom. Bobby, who is a teacher too, was just talking to us about a sensitive subject, and one that is near and dear to you as we talk about book censorship. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to perhaps say some things you didn't get a chance to just a moment ago.
Sure. So when we talk about teen attempted suicide in the LGBTQ community, it is tragically high. The numbers, it's devastating. But we have a governor, a state, local leaders that say it's bad. Communities that shame them for being who they are. Laws passed directed against them. So to say that one school district or one bill, right, is protecting these students from an incident is completely untrue. The governor could stand up and say, you know what, it's okay to be gay, right? It's okay to be trans and identify with who you are and love who you want to love. But they don't do that. They create division and then literally take away a safe space for our kids. It's unfair.
And so I actually wanted to address that too, because even when we talk about parental rights and the right to know, I agree that no one loves their child more than their parents. But at the same time, I love my child enough to know that if they feel more comfortable speaking about a sensitive subject to one adult versus myself, I love them enough to be able to create that safe place wherever that is. And if they feel that that safe place isn't with me at this time, then I would more want for them to be able to have that discussion with someone that they feel safe with versus not having it at all, and it leads to an attempt on their life, or for them to not feel as if they want to be comfortable, as if they want to be in this world, in this society. So I think that when we talk about, creating safe places and loving our children, if we're in education, we love children. And so we want to be able to create a safe space for children to learn and grow. And it doesn't mean that we want to parent them, but if that safe place is that, hey, we can have hard conversations and we're a free thinking society, then we want to be able to create a space where we have free thinkers, that you don't have to be gay in order to accept someone for how they want to live their personal life. So I think when we talk about, being able to censor, that information being available, we have to be careful about the words that we use and the tactics that we use to be able to make people think that this is a bigger issue than what it is. The issue is that, when we talk about abuse in the home and where a student comes from in their home, you don't get to see mental illness. Mental illness doesn't walk in the door and says, hey, I have mental issues, or I'm dealing with suicidal thoughts. Those aren't things that you can see. You can see physical abuse, but mental abuse you don't get to see. So you're not able to even get to those conversations until you have a conversation. So, how do you help a student, mitigate mental abuse if you don't have a conversation to be able to open those questions up? So I think as parents, we have to love our children enough to say, hey, listen, if I don't have what you need and you can get what you need from here, and if that means talking to a teacher and the teacher refers you to counseling, I'm all for that. We do need more mental health counseling in our schools. We need that. But what does that look like? How do we get to the mental health counselor if the teacher doesn't refer them? Like are we depending on students to self-refer? What does that look like? So I think that, when we talk about censorship and giving kids the opportunity to have information in books, because that's what we want to lead the conversation into. Like when we talk about, book censorship, if a kid if we don't want them to be able to say it, and they have this burning desire into them, then they can say, hey, listen, well, let me look out and maybe seek some information from some books. But no, you can't do that either, because we want to create a free thinking society, but we really don't. We want you to think the way that we want you to think.
Let's ask Stephanie about that question in particular. I know that when it comes to books being pulled, we saw over the summer a real big push to pull books that perhaps had language in them, political ideas, religious beliefs, historical perspective, and sexual orientation, gender identity. Those books were really under the microscope. And there were some teachers that said, we want our students to learn a lot of different things when they're in our classrooms. And so, especially depending on age appropriateness, we are asking our kids to learn these things and really to read about these things. Right. What are your thoughts when it comes to pulling some books from the school shelves and library shelves as well?
Well, I think the key, and you said it, was age appropriateness. I have seen some books that were used. There's a particular book called It's Perfectly Normal that was supposedly age appropriate for 5th grade and up. And I can tell you, if you have not seen the book, there is it literally is pornographic material in the book. And I absolutely 100% do not think that a child should have access to that book without their parental permission. And so I am not for banning books. I actually am very opposed to banning books. I want to see if books have material that parents are not comfortable with. Again, we have to remember we're talking about minors. We're not talking about 19, 20-year-olds, college students. We're talking about minors. Minors who, we don't let them drive until a certain age. We don't let them vote until a certain age. There's, they can't consent to, sexual activity until a certain age. And so this is why I think we need to make sure that, once again, parents are involved in these conversations. I would not want my 10-year-old daughter to ever see that book, It's Perfectly Normal, until I decide that it is time and appropriate for her based on her own maturity and knowing her like no one else does as her mother. And so I'm not for banning anything. I'm for making sure that parents are aware if there are books that their children want to read that they're not comfortable with, then I think, the parents need to be involved in those conversations.
Bobby, we spoke with an author who told us, and he had his book pulled not only in the state of Florida, but across the country, but he told us that students can quickly find much worse information. He was sharing his life as a gay young man and his struggle with gender identity. He said, young people can find this a lot faster on their cell phones and on television than they can find it in a book. And he said most students we've found don't read a book 200 pages to get to this information. What's been your experience?
Sure. We unfortunately have seen a lack of interest in reading a novel, right? And I think that's unfortunate. I think we all should be reading novels, right? It's, as a educated society, that's what we should do. And they're fun too. Reading's fun, right? So with that, then if we're going, again, back to parental rights, then parents need to monitor internet usage. Yes. And apps, right? Because they can just take their phone out and, search any of this material at any time. My huge concern as an educator is when we talk about banning books or giving parents oversight on which text should be taught, I want to make sure that we're not excluding facts. Right? We're talking about evolution, right? We're talking about historical events that actually happened. So I need different perspectives in our community that are still being taught, not just an agenda-driven parental oversight, right? Age-appropriate text. Of course, we can all agree to age-appropriate text. There's no problem there. However, once we start saying, well, this book has this worldview which I disagree with, or this group of facts that I disagree with, it should be discarded. That's the problem.
Stephanie, Tanika, and Bobby, thank you very much for being here with us. It is always wonderful to hear from those who are really on the front line, educating our students and working with our students in the classroom. We're really forever grateful to you. So thank you for being here with you. It does mean a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for us. Another Justice for All inside the classroom. Stay safe, everyone, and stay informed.